There is something about animals that's always felt a little otherworldly. The way a cat seems to know what you're thinking before you say a word. The way a crow watches from the treetops, always appearing when you least expect it. Or the way a dog stands guard, sensing danger long before its human does. Throughout history, people have believed that some animals are more than just companions. They are allies, guides, and even protectors of the unseen forces. In the world of folklore and magic, these creatures have a name. They are familiars. They aren't just pets, they are partners in witchcraft, spiritual guardians, and symbols of a deep connection between humans and nature. But what exactly is a familiar? Where does the belief come from? And why have these creatures captured the imagination of witches, cunning folk, and storytellers for centuries? Today we're diving into the rich, fascinating history of witches' familiars, exploring the role in magic, myth, and modern witchcraft. I'm Chris, and welcome to the Lorekeepers Library. Now before we begin, I would like to invite you to subscribe to our library and share these videos so that we can keep folklore alive. We always like to hear from you, so do join us in the comments below and drop us a like. A familiar was never just a pet. In folklore, it was a creature bound to someone, serving as a magical assistant, a spiritual guide, and even extension of the witch's own soul. The word familiar comes from the Latin familiaris, meaning household servant, but these creatures were far from ordinary. In European folklore of the medieval and early modern periods, a familiar or familiar spirit was believed to be a supernatural entity that assisted witches and cunning folk in their practice of magic. These entities were thought to manifest in various forms, commonly such as cats, dogs, toads, or birds, but sometimes they even appear as humanoid or human figures. A familiar was never just an animal. In folklore magic tradition, it was a presence, both seen and unseen, woven into the daily life of a witch that served. These creatures played many roles, like guardians, guides, conduits of power, and silent keepers of secrets. They were not passive companions, but active participants in the world of magic and mystery. At its core, a familiar was a guardian, but what exactly did that mean? The idea of a spiritual protector goes beyond the simple companionships. Many witches believed that the familiars could sense dangers that human intuition could not. For instance, in some folklore, it suggests that a familiar would react aggressively or anxiously before ill-intentioned visitors arrived. This belief ties into a broader supernatural tradition across cultures. Animals have long been seen possessors or heightened awareness, capable of detecting spirits, omens, or shifts in energy. In England during the 16th and 17th century, some witches described their familiars as warding off curses or malevolent spirits. The idea was that a familiar could act as a shield, absorbing harmful magic directed at their master. In some traditions, witches would whisper corrective charms to their familiars, asking them to guard the home or a specific place of power. Even today, remnants of this belief persists. Many modern practitioners still see their pets as protectors of their sacred spaces, believing they instinctively guard against negative energy. The familiar was often described as a bridge between worlds, not quite of this realm, but not quite of the other. This concept aligns with a much older tradition of spiritual messengers. In Celtic mythology, certain animals were believed to exist between the human world and the other world, the mystical realm of spirits and deities. The blackbird, for example, was seen as a harbinger of messengers from beyond. Similarly, in Norse traditions, describe Hugin and Munin, the ravens of Odin, carrying knowledge from unseen realms. Familiars were thought to help witches communicate with spirits, whether by acting as vessels for supernatural forces and guiding their masters through trance work, or responding to unseen presences. And some witches believed their familiars could receive messages from deities or spirits and relay them through dreams or physical behaviour. For example, the 17th century Scottish witch Isabel Gaudy, during her infamous confessions, claimed that her familiar, a spirit in animal form, helped her cross into otherworldly realms, guiding her through spiritual flight. Though her testimony was likely extracted under duress, it reflects that her long-held belief in familiars as supernatural emissaries. A witch's power was often thought to be amplified by the presence of a familiar. This concept was not unique to European traditions. In shamanistic practices across cultures, spiritual animals or helper spirits are believed to strengthen a practitioner's abilities. The idea of a familiar as a magical conduit appears in the 1566 Chelmsford witch trials in England, where accused witch Elizabeth Francis testified that her cat, Sathan, helped her cast spells and gave her knowledge beyond her own understanding. According to the trial records, she claimed her familiar allowed her to heal and harm at will, channeling the power through her. And some folklore suggests that familiars acted almost like batteries of magical energy. They were believed to store a witch's excess power, releasing it during rituals or even help direct it. There are many accounts of witches stroking their familiars whilst chanting, using the creature as a focus point for spell work. Even in non-European traditions, the idea of a spiritual animal helpers in magic is widespread. Amongst indigenous cultures in North America, some shamans worked with spirit animals to guide them through healing ceremonies, much like the witches said to rely on familiars in their craft. While much of the folklore surrounding familiars frames them as magical assistants, their role as emotional and spiritual companions was just as important. Being a witch, or even simply being accused of one, was dangerous. Many of the women and men accused of witchcraft lived in isolation, feared or shunned by their communities. In a time where superstition could mean death, a familiar could provide not just magical aid, but comfort. One of the most famous examples comes from the case of Agnes Waterhouse, one of the first women executed for witchcraft in England in 1566. She claimed her familiar, a spotted cat named Satan, had been her closest companions for years. The idea of witches forming deep emotional bonds with their familiars was so persistent that in some trial records the accused wept not for themselves, but for their animals, fearing what would happen to them after their master's death. The idea that familiars held knowledge beyond human understanding is another key aspect of the legend. Many stories describe witches whispering secrets to their familiars, entrusting them with spells, fears, and plans. There are even whispers of familiars acting as spies, listening and watching and carrying information from one place to another. In some traditions, familiars were trusted with carry messages between witches, either by moving physically from one home to another or through supernatural means. This concept aligns with a broader magical tradition, and many indigenous and folk magic systems include beliefs in animals as messengers of unseen forces. One of the most intriguing aspects of the familiar is the belief that its fate was intertwined with that of the witch. Some folklore suggests that if a familiar was harmed, its master would suffer as well. Others claimed a witch's death would cause the familiar to vanish, disappearing back into the spiritual world. There are even accounts from trial records where people testified that after a suspected witch had died, the familiar was never seen again. In one 17th century case, villagers swore that the black cat that had been seen constantly at the accused witch's home vanished the moment she was executed. In many ways, this belief cements the idea that familiars were not simply animals, they were something more, something liminal, existing in the space between the everyday and the extraordinary. A familiar was never just a pet. It was a guardian, a mentor, an amplifier of magic, and a silent confidant. Whether guiding its master, strengthening spells, or simply offering an unwavering presence, a familiar existed at the edges of folklore and reality. Their stories persist not just because they were feared, but because they were loved. They were the watchful eyes in the night, the whispers in the darkness, the quiet force standing between the known and the unknown. Though the terms familiar and spirit guide is sometimes used interchangeably, they refer to distinctly different entities within magical and spiritual traditions. While both are believed to aid individuals in the spiritual magical paths, their nature, roles, and origins set them apart. A familiar is traditionally understood as a supernatural or spiritual assistance that aids a witch or magical practitioner in their craft. The concept comes preliminary from European folklore, particularly from the Middle Ages and through to the early modern period. Familiars are often thought to be embodied spirits, appearing in the form of physical animals such as cats, dogs, toads, and birds. In some traditions, familiars are believed to be spirits that temporarily inhabit an animal's body or manifest in a spectral form. A spirit guide, on the other hand, is an entirely spiritual entity, not a physical being. Spirit guides are believed to originate from higher spiritual realms and are often associated with guardian spirits, ancestors, or enlightened beings. Unlike familiars, they do not take on physical forms, though they may be symbolically appear as animals, humans, or even abstract shapes in dreams, visions, and meditative experiences. The concept of spirit guides are found in many cultures, from Native American to Buddhist and shamanistic traditions. They are thought to assist the individual in personal growth, enlightenment, and life purpose rather than magical workings. A familiar acts as a magical aid, helping a witch perform spells, rituals, and divination. They are often seen as conduits of magical energy, enhancing a practitioner's abilities as acting as guardians against malevolent forces. Some folklore even suggests that familiars could physically fetch ingredients for spells, assisting in scrying or healing, and warn their witch of impending danger. A spirit guide, however, serves more an advisory and protective role, often providing guidance through intuition, dreams, or meditation. They do not directly participate in magical workings, but instead help individuals navigate their spiritual journeys. A spirit guide may offer wisdom, protection, or support during significant life decisions, whereas a familiar is preliminarily linked to the practical magical assistance. And one key distinction between the two is their duration and relationship with the individual. A familiar is often believed to be tied to a single witch for as long as their bond lasts. Some folklore suggests that familiars may outlive their witches, disappearing upon their master's death, or even be passed down through generations. A spirit guide is usually a lifelong presence, though individuals may have multiple guides throughout the different stages of their life. Spirit guides are believed to help the person from birth until death, sometimes even continue their connection beyond the physical world. During the European witch trials, familiars were often seen as sinister, often labelled as demons or minions of the devil. Many accused witches confessed, under duress, that their familiars whispered dark secrets or performed magic on their behalf. This perception led to the fear and demonization of animals associated with witches, particularly black cats, toads, and owls. And spirit guides, however, were not historically feared in the same way. Across many cultures, spirit guides have been revered and respected, often seen as ancestral spirits, guardian angels, or divine messengers. Unlike familiars, they were very rarely persecuted or vilified. Today, both familiars and spirit guides remain important in the spiritual and magical traditions. In modern witchcraft and Neopaganism, familiars are sometimes viewed as animal companions with a deep spiritual connection rather than a supernatural entity. Some witches still believe in the traditional idea of the energetic bond between practitioner and the animal, while others see the familiar as a more psychological and symbolic presence rather than an actual spirit. And spirit guides continue to play their role in the New Age spirituality, shamanism, and other religious traditions. They are often connected with meditation, soul work, personal transformation, acting as an unseen mentor rather than a magical assistant. While both familiars and spirit guides are spiritual allies, they serve different purposes. A familiar is a magical companion, often taking on an animal form to help witches in their craft. A spirit guide is a higher spiritual entity that offers guidance, protection, and wisdom without direct involvement in magic. Both remain powerful symbols of connection to the unseen world, representing the many ways humans have sought companionship and wisdom beyond the physical realm. While nearly any animal could, in theory, serve as a witch's companion, certain creatures appear again and again in folklore, each carrying their own meaning, their own power, and their own connection to magic. And whether they were feared, revered, or simply misunderstood, these animals became deeply tied to mysticism around witchcraft. Take the cat, for instance. Perhaps the most famous of all familiars, the cat's reputation as a magical creature spans centuries and cultures. In ancient Egypt, cats were sacred, associated with the goddess Bastet, a protector of the home and forces against evil. Fast forward to medieval Europe, and the cat takes on a far more darker reputation. It's mysterious, independent, unnervingly and intelligent. The way they slink through the shadows, their abilities to see in the dark, and the tendency to stare at things unseen. It is no wonder that people thought the ties were supernatural. Witches were said to communicate with their feline companions telepathically, and in some stories, cats could even act as a second pair of eyes, spying on enemies or gathering information. Then there's the toad, an animal that might be seen particularly magical at first glance. But in the world of witchcraft, toads have always been creatures of transformation. Their life cycle, starting as a tadpole, shifting into something entirely new, made them a natural symbol of change and rebirth. Many believed that a toad familiar could grant witchcraft access to hidden knowledge, particularly when it came to potions and poisons. The idea wasn't completely unfounded. There are some species of toads that secrete hallucinogenic substances, which, in the right or wrong hands, could be used to mind-altering purposes. The owl, with its silent flight and piercing gaze, has long been associated with wisdom and the unseen. In Greek mythology, the owl was sacred to Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and it was believed that if an owl flew over a soldier before battle, it was a sign of victory. But in European folklore, owls took on more of an ominous role, often seen as harbingers of death or messengers from the spirit realm. It is easy to see why witches might have been drawn to them, the ability to see what others could not, to navigate the night without fear. They made them powerful allies for those who operated in the shadows. And then we have the raven, a bird that seems to exist between worlds. In Norse mythology, ravens were the eyes and ears of Odin, flying across the land to gather wisdom for the Allfather. In Celtic lore, they were tied to Morrigan, the goddess of war and fate, appearing on battlefields as a sign of death or victory. Ravens have always been seen as intelligent, even unnervingly so. They recognise faces, solve puzzles, and even mimic human speech. For a witch, having a raven familiar wasn't just about companionship, it was about having a creature that could listen, learn, and perhaps even carry messages between the worlds. Snakes have long been linked to magic, often as symbols of transformation, knowledge, and rebirth. In many cultures they represent wisdom and healing. Think of the Kundali serpent in Hindu mysticism, a coiled energy at the base of the spine, said to awaken enlightenment. In other traditions they symbolise the cycle of life and death, shedding their skin to emerge new again. The snake familiar was believed to grant a witch power over hidden knowledge, secrets buried deep beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. And then there's man's best friend, dogs. Though they might not be the first animal that comes to mind when thinking about familiars, they do have a long-standing history in folklore. In many cultures, dogs were believed to guard the gates of the afterlife. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the dead in Egyptian mythology, or Cerberus, the multi-headed hound of Hades. But beyond their role as guardians, dogs were seen as loyal companions for those who walked the line between life and death. Black dogs, in particular, show up again and again in folklore, often as spectral figures appearing on lonely roads or near ancient burial sites. Having a dog as a familiar wasn't just about protection, it was about having a guardian that could sense dangers unseen, and it was an ally that could warn approaching spirits or threats lurking in the dark. Each of these animals carried their own unique power, their own place in the world of magic. Whether they were guides, protectors, messengers, or symbols of transformation, they weren't just pets. They were allies, deeply woven into the fabric of witchcraft and folklore. And even now in the modern world, their reputation lingers. The black cat crossing your path, the owl's cry in the dead of night, the raven watching you from the distance, all echoes of time when witches walked with their familiars at their side, connecting to something beyond what the eye could see. The idea of a witch's familiar may feel distinctly European, but the truth is the concept of magical animal companions stretches across the world. In nearly every culture we find stories of supernatural allies, creatures that guide, protect, and act as messengers between human world and something beyond. Some of these beings were spiritual entities, appearing in dreams and visions. Others were believed to be a physical animal imbued with magical powers, bound to a person through fate or magic. Take the ancient Celts, for example. Their mythology is full of creatures that blur the line between animal and spirit. The Asorci, otherworldly beings said to inhabit the land, often took form of animals to interact with humans. Druids and seers were believed to have deep connections with these spirits, who could guide them or often glimpse into the future. Certain animals carried stronger ties to the mystical. White stags were seen as messengers from the other world, appearing in moments of fate, while ravens were linked to war and prophecy, often appearing tales of the Morrigan, the Irish goddess of fate and battle. Hounds, too, had their own power, serving as protectors and guides, just as the legendary warrior Cuchulainn, whose name means Hound of Culann, was said to possess near supernatural strength and loyalty. The Norse had their own version of this idea as well. They believed in the Fylgja, guardian spirits that took form of animals, each one uniquely tied to a person's fate. A warrior might be followed by a wolf or a bear, while a fox, Fylgja, could signify cleverness and cunning. These spirits weren't just personal guides, some were bound to entire families, passed down through generations to protectors of their lineage. Even the gods weren't without their magical creatures. Odin himself had his two ravens, Hugin and Munin, who flew across the world gathering knowledge and returning to whisper secrets in his ear. Travelling east, Japan has a long tradition of supernatural animals, many of whom served similar roles to familiars. The kitsune, or fox spirit, is one of the most famous. Revered as both a trickster and a protector, kitsune were believed to be messengers of the Inari, the deity of rice and prosperity. Some legends tell of fox spirits forming deep bonds with humans, offering them knowledge or even transforming into human form to act as guardians. Another well-known creature in Japanese folklore is the tengu, a crow or hawk-like spirit that often depicted as a fierce warrior or teacher of magic. These beings were thought to reside in the mountains, acting as guardians of sacred knowledge and occasionally taking on human students to train in martial arts and mysticism. And across the world, many indigenous American cultures also hold strong spiritual beliefs in animals. They often refer to them as totem animals, but totem animals aren't just symbols, they are spiritual presences, deeply woven into a person's identity, offering protection, guidance and wisdom. A wolf might represent loyalty and strength, while an eagle embodies vision and spiritual insight. Shamans and medicine people formed deep relationships with these animal spirits, calling upon them for healing, guidance, and even protection in battle. The bond between human and animal wasn't just superstition, it was a fundamental belief that nature and the spiritual world were inseparably connected. In Slavic folklore, magical beings often took their role in the household protectors. The domovoi, small guardian spirits, were said to watch over homes and families, sometimes appearing as small animals. If they liked a household, it would be kept safe. If angered, they could cause mischief and even disaster. The leshy, a creature of the forest, could take form of the wolf, bear or owl, acting as a guardian of nature itself. To those who respected the land, the leshy could be an ally, but those who harmed the forest, they would not be so lucky. Even in South Asia, we often see gods and spirits take animal forms. There's a deep connection between magic and creatures of the world. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, powerful beings like the Nagas, serpent spirits tied to wisdom and water, the Garuda, the divine eagle who fought demons, serve as protectors and symbols of divine power. These weren't just animals, they were entities tied to the very fabric of the universe, embodying strength, wisdom, and sometimes destruction. And then we have Africa, where the line between human and animal spirit is even thinner. Many African cultures believe in animal ancestors, powerful spirits that continue to guide their descendants. The San people of southern Africa speak of powerful animals, spirit guides that help shamans in their spiritual journeys. The Yoruba religion, which influenced hoodoo and voodoo, includes orishas, with sacred animal companions. Shango, the god of thunder, is linked to leopards, whilst Onya, the goddess of storms and change, is associated with the buffalo. Looking at these creatures together, it's clear that the idea of supernatural animal companions isn't just a product of medieval witchcraft, it is something far older, something deeply ingrained in human history. And whether they're messengers of gods, ancestral spirits, or personal guides, these creatures bridge the gap between the seen and the unseen, between the magic and the natural world. It is a concept that has survived for thousands of years, crossing continents, cultures, and beliefs, and even now, in the stories we tell, the symbols we hold dear, the spirits of the familiar lives on. And for those who believe in them, familiars are more than just animals. They were trusted allies, sources of wisdom, and links to forces beyond human understanding. But to those who feared them, particularly in religious authorities of medieval and early European, familiars became something more sinister. They weren't just animal companions, they were proof of witchcraft itself, tangible evidence that a person had made a pact with dark forces, and as the fear of witches grew, so did the fear of their familiars. The idea that witches had special magical animals wasn't always seen as evil. In earlier pagan traditions, shamans and cunning folk and healers often spoke of spiritual animals, creatures that guided them in their craft. But as Christianity spread across Europe, these relationships were slowly rewritten. What has once been seen as a spiritual connection became corrupt bargains, proof that the witch had surrendered their soul to the devil. By the time of the European witch hunts in 15th to 18th centuries, the presence of a familiar could mean the difference between life and death. Trials across England, Scotland and colonial America frequently include testimonies about strange creatures that visited accused witches: small black cats, toads, hares and even insects. These animals were believed to serve the witch, running errands, spying on their neighbours and even attacking victims through supernatural means. One of the most famous cases comes from the Pendle witch trials of 1612 in Lancashire, England. During the trial, a young girl named Jeanette Device testified that her grandmother, Elizabeth Device, had a familiar in the shape of a brown dog called Bull. According to Jeanette, her grandfather would speak to Bull in secret, giving him commands that led to the deaths of several townsfolk. It didn't matter that there was no real proof. Her testimony alone was enough. Elizabeth Device, along with 9 others, was found guilty and hanged. In the Essex witch trials of the 16th and 17th centuries, familiars played an even more direct role in accusations. One of the most well-documented cases involved a woman named Elizabeth Francis, who confessed in 1566 to owning a white cat named Sathan. She claimed that Sathan helped her in acts of witchcraft, bringing her wealth and revenge against those who wronged her. She also admitted to feeding the cat drops of her own blood, an act to the authorities confirmed that the familiars weren't just animals, they were demonic entities sustained by an unholy pact. And the fear of familiars even crossed the Atlantic. During the Salem witch trials of 1692, some of the accused were said to have spectral animals that tormented their victims. One of the most chilling examples of the testimony against George Burr, a former minister accused of living in a coven. Witnesses claimed they saw a small black creature whispering in the ears during sermons, proof in their minds that he was working with dark forces. He was eventually convicted and executed. These fears didn't fade overnight. Even at the height of the witch trials, the idea of familiars was its dangerous persistence. Black cats in particular remained deeply tied to superstition. Their association with witches made them symbols of bad luck. In some rural areas, people still whispered about witches' hares, creatures that weren't what they seemed, said to be a witches in disguise, capable of slipping through keyholes and vanishing into the night. The power and fear of familiars was never really about the animals themselves. They were about control, about finding ways to demonize those who lived outside society's rules, particularly women, healers, and those who carried older pre-Christian beliefs. The familiar became a symbol of independence, of hidden knowledge, and to those in power that was dangerous. Because if a woman could have a secret ally, an unseen protector, what else might she be capable of? In the end, the fear of familiars was a reflection of the fear of witches themselves, a fear of those who refused to conform, who listened to something beyond the church, who walked the world with unseen forces at their side. And for centuries, familiars were feared, hunted, and used as proof of dark dealings. But today, they have reclaimed their place in the world, not as sinister omens, but as trusted companions, spiritual guides, in many cases, beloved pets. With the rise of Neopaganism, Wicca, and even modern witchcraft and Druidry, many practitioners have embraced the concept of familiar once again. But unlike the dark tales of old, today's familiars are not seen as demonic entities or servants of dark magic. Instead, they are viewed as spiritual allies, energetic guardians, and symbols of a witch's personal path. Some believe familiars act as a bridge between the physical and spiritual world, enhancing intuition, offering protection, and helping their human companions navigate their magical practices. But what does a familiar look like in the modern age? The answer varies from witch to witch. And for many, familiars are real, living creatures. They are animals, dogs, birds, reptiles, and even insects, those who share a deep, almost inexplicable connection with their human counterpart. These animals aren't performing supernatural feats or whispering secrets of the universe, but they seem to know things. They might appear in a witch's life just at the right moment, offer comfort during rituals, or have the uncanny ability to see energy shifts. For example, some witches find that their cat is drawn to their altar space, curling up beside candles and crystals that are drawn to the energy of their practice. Others have birds that seem to appear whenever they meditate outdoors, or dogs who refuse to leave their side when they're casting spells. Even small creatures like rabbits or snakes can become familiars, especially if they bring a sense of connection, inspiration, or protection to their human. Of course, not all pets are familiars. A witch's connection to their familiar is different from a regular pet-owner bond. It is more about an intuitive understanding, a recognition of something deeper. A familiar may guide a witch's practice, acting as a grounding force during rituals or a source of wisdom in difficult times. Some practitioners even believe their familiars have chosen them, appearing at the right time in their life to serve a purpose, whether it be protection, emotional support, or guiding them towards self-discovery. And not all witches have domestic animals as familiars. Some feel a connection to wild animals, believing that nature itself sends them messengers. A crow that always seems to be watching from a nearby tree, a fox that appears at significant moments, or an owl whose call seems to echo in meaningful ways. These encounters can feel more like a mere coincidence. In modern druid and shamanistic traditions, familiars sometimes called totem animals, spiritual animals, or power animals serve as messengers or guides, offering wisdom during moments of change or uncertainty. A witch may believe that they are certain animals appearing in their life for a reason, offering insight into their personal journey. Some examples of this: a witch going through a major life transition might find themselves constantly encountering butterflies, which are symbols of transformation. A practitioner seeking inner wisdom may feel a deep connection to the owl, a creature associated with knowledge and intuition. A fox appearing at the crossroads, both literal and metaphorical, could be a sign to embrace adaptability and cunning. These encounters aren't always about control. Unlike domestic familiars, wild familiars cannot be summoned or kept close. Instead, they appear when needed, acting as reminders of nature's wisdom and the unseen force at work in the world. And not every modern practitioner has a physical familiar. Some witches work with spiritual familiars, beings that exist in the astral plane, dream world, or energetic realms. These are not physical animals, but spiritual entities that offer guidance, protection, or knowledge. In some traditions, spiritual familiars are thought to be ancestral spirits taking on an animal form, whilst others see them as elemental beings tied to the earth, air, fire, or water. Some witches meet their spiritual familiar during meditation, dreams, or ritual work, experiencing visions of an animal that offer wisdom or comfort. And spirit familiars are often seen as helpers in magical practice. A practitioner might call upon their spirit familiar for guidance before performing a spell, or seeking their presence for protection while working with energy. Unlike physical familiars, these spirits do not need food, water, or care. They exist purely in an energetic state, appearing when their guidance is needed. Of course, modern witchcraft doesn't exist in a vacuum, and pop culture has taken a significant influence on how people perceive familiars today. From Salem, the talking cat in Sabrina Teenage Witch, to Hedwig, Harry Potter's snowy owl, the idea of witches' companions has become deeply embedded in public imagination. These depictions, though fictional, have helped keep the idea of the familiar alive, even in a world that no longer fears them as evidence of sorcery. Some modern witches embrace these portrayals, finding inspiration in the idea of having a magical companion, whilst others see them as overly dramatized, missing the true spiritual significance of a familiar. Still, there is no denying that our fascination with mystical animal companions remains strong as ever. And today, the idea of the familiar is no longer one of fear or persecution. Instead, it is a celebration of connection to animals, to nature, and something greater than ourselves. Whether Richard's familiar is a cat curled up beside their tarot cards, a spirit animal appearing in dreams, or a wild creature crossing their path just at the right moment, the bond remains as strong as ever. What was once seen as a sign of dark magic is now a reminder of the deep mystical relationships humans have always had with the natural world. Familiars are no longer hunted or feared. Instead, they are cherished, understood, and in many cases, spoiled with treats and affection. Because whether you are a practicing witch or simply an animal lover, one thing remains true. Sometimes the creatures who walk beside us are more than just pets. Sometimes they are something more. And for centuries, familiars have been seen as everything from magical allies to symbols of mystery and power. Whether they are guardians, guides, or simply loyal companions, their presence in folklore reminds us of a deep bond between humans and the natural world. Today, the idea of the familiar has taken on a new life, no longer feared, but embraced as a connection to something greater. Maybe you have a pet that always seems to know when you need comfort, or perhaps a certain animal crosses your path in moments of change. Whether you believe in familiars as spiritual allies or simply fascinating pieces of folklore, their stories continue to shape the way we see the world. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe and share. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these stories coming. And if you've ever felt a strange connection to an animal, or if like us you have your own familiars, we would love to hear about them in the comments below. And so thank you for joining me on this journey into the Lorekeepers Library. And so, until next time, keep your familiars close and keep exploring the world with wonder.